Welcome back. My name is Keith Feldman. I'm assistant professor of ethnic studies here at UC Berkeley. I was thrilled to get an invitation to come moderate this really exciting panel at this really exciting and timely symposium on research justice. I wanted to take really briefly a quick moment to express thanks and gratitude, of course, to the American Cultures Engaged Scholarship staff, which for 5 years has been doing amazing bridge building work, both inside the university and sort of across the geographies that the university aims to reach, including with a partnership with the Cal Public Service Center and Susan Akeen. Also a big shout out and thanks to the Data Center and to all of you who are here when you could be in so many other places, eating and drinking and talking and nourishing your bodies and nourishing your political imaginations together. I just wanted to flag very briefly that, as you may know, this is the marking the 25th anniversary of the American Cultures requirement here at UC Berkeley, and I've been thinking about what research justice means. When I think about research justice, what does this concept mean? And one anchor point for me has come out of an essay that a faculty member here at UC Berkeley in African American Studies named June Jordan, who was very instrumental in the struggle for AC. This is what she wrote in the context of that struggle for AC. This was an essay entitled Diversity or Death that she wrote, published in February of 1990. And she's talking about the kind of the emergence of diversity as a critical concept. And so she says, what's new is not diversity per se, but rather our efforts inside the United States to redistribute power so that people of whatever color or culture or sexual persuasion shall possess equality before the law and due representation in government and due representation in the academic curricula and on the faculties and in the student bodies of our democracy. Right? I think it's a really helpful sort of anchor point to think about where and how we've been thinking through different kinds of rubrics for research justice. Okay, so today's panel is entitled a question: how do research justice partnerships move social justice forward? It's a really delightful pleasure to have our panelists here with us today who can speak to this kind of question from a real diversity of their own positionalities and perspectives, operating in different domains. And so what I'd like to do is have the panelists each introduce themselves for about 3 to 5 minutes to tell us a bit about your own organizational and institutional affiliations, and a brief description of the kind of research justice work that you've been doing. Then I'm going to turn it over to you for a brief moment of buzz to turn to your neighbors and partners and think through a similar question about what research justice is and means to you. And then I have a series of questions for our panelists. Also, at the end of our session, we'll have time for a more dynamic Q&A. I know this dynamic in and of itself requires a bit of bridging. So we have note cards at your table. Please feel free to use your note cards to jot down any questions you have as the session proceeds. Okay, so now I'm pleased to turn it over to our panelists. And why don't we can just go down the table.
Okay, thank you, Keith, and thank you to all who came. I'd like to thank the organizers also for this great and enormous effort of bringing us all together, and I want to thank the Ohlone people on whose land this symposium is taking place. My name is Paola Bacchetta. I'm a professor in the Department of Gender and Women's Studies here at UC Berkeley. But I was also an activist in one of the organizations that I'm going to be talking about called Dyketactics, which was founded in 1975, and which we've kind of stayed together over the years, and we have a Facebook group together now. We've had several sorts of reunions, including one last year. We're having another one in August. And we have questions around what to do with our archives, how to put together archives that I'll be posing. I'm also going to be talking a little bit about a group that called LOCS, Lesbiennes de Couleur, Lesbians of Color in France, of which I'm also a part, because after the Dyketactics thing, I was in exile in France for many, many years, and so my activism happened first in the US and then in France. And so that too is a group where I'm co-editing with some members of the group who are not academics. Also in Dyketactics, I'm the only academic in both groups, and I'm co-editing with the LOCS group, Lesbiennes de Couleur group, a book that will be a sort of like the Off Our Backs kind of a book that will, with poetry collections of personal narratives and other things that for the first time will be available, first time in France anyway. So to introduce myself, I guess I'll just say, besides, teaching in gender and women's studies at UC Berkeley, I'm also a steering committee member of the California-wide Center for New Racial Studies, former coordinator of the Gender Consortium at UC Berkeley, former chair of the Beatrice Spain Research Group, which is does research on gender, race, sexuality, colonialism, occupations, imperialism, etc. And my interests are in transnational feminist and queer theory, decolonial and postcolonial theory, queer of color theory, and aggregationalities, or things like intersectionalities, etc. I'm interested in right-wing movements and analyzing and critiquing them, of course. And I'm also interested in thinking about liberation-oriented movements, insurgencies, artistic expressions, especially by feminist and queer of color subjects. And I'm interested also in alliances of all sorts. I wrote and co-edited a number of books, but I will not bore you with the titles. You can look on academia.edu. And I'll just mention I also have about 40 journal articles and book chapters. I guess, do I have any time left, or should I just?
Maybe
I'll stop now.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm stopping now. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ellen. I am a PhD student from UCLA, and the institution or the organization that I am rooting my presentation on is the International Women's Network Against Militarism. So my background is I come from Hawaii, and I was able to go to school in political science and cultural anthropology and information studies. But a lot of my research was inspired by my participation in this International Women's Network, which I was a mentee of. So back in Hawaii, I was lucky to be part of, to be outreached, I guess, to nonprofits that were doing demilitarization work in the islands and its relationship to Kanaka Maoli sovereignty. And me as an Ilocano immigrant, trying to make connections between the Philippine history of occupation and how it connects to Hawaii. So this whole background really shaped my experience in academia and in kind of focusing on militarism from the disciplinary perspectives of poli-sci, cultural anthropology, and information studies. My dissertation is on community archives, in which I look at how communities see a problem, militarism, and how they produce records to document and also create representations of their evidence to justify their definitions or their arguments about what is truly security or genuine security. So the prompt that I wrote in the application to this symposium was about building autonomous spaces research and knowledge production. And what I mean by that is how the International Women's Network is a group of women from the countries of Puerto Rico, US, Hawaii, Guam, Philippines, Okinawa, Japan, and South Korea, and how they've been meeting since 1997 to redefine security. And autonomous spaces is basically the spaces where frontline activists, survivors of military violence, scholars, and policymakers have come together to look at the issues of militarism affecting communities that are negatively impacted by military bases. So these, at first, they met in Okinawa, and they were organizing and listening to the stories of women who have either witnessed or experienced rape around the military bases by US personnel, military personnel. And so through these meetings that they've had 1997, 98, 2000 in different parts of the world. So in Washington, D.C., and the last one they had is in Puerto Rico. It was meetings from 1997 to 2012. And these are basically grant-funded experiences, not through academia, but through philanthropic organizations like Global Fund for Women, for example, some of the funders that we have tapped into to support bringing these meetings, make these meetings happen and bring together international delegates to talk and to share information about militarism and strategies of resistance. And they also have been documenting their experiences, and some of this information is available on genuinesecurity.org, which has a history of the network. We also have some materials in the back right there, which has some articles and some campaigns that we're working on. And so basically, I think that the Women's Network has been producing social networks, relationships, to keep this network going and to facilitate the human interaction. But also they've been building technical networks, if that means looking at the website or going to places that are militarized and seeing how the infrastructure in one place is interrelated to an infrastructure in another place, to see the connections across bases. And so basically what I'm looking at in terms of research is the action research method of how these communities do more sort of Freirean methods of posing questions about how is militarism affecting a community, and then and what will make people move to do something about it. I'll talk a little bit more about that in later questions. But another thing about research is this concept of, we usually in academia, we have conferences and presentations. And I think that for us, we translate that as actions and events to change, either doing like public organizing rallies or, to change public consciousness, or writing in op-ed media versus journals. There's some articles back there, again, I want to share with you guys. But also another thing is, who do we talk to is institutional leaders. So either if it's going to see our congressional people, that is our audience that we want to share our knowledge with, or is it community people that are directly impacted? These are the people that we want to share information with. So that's all for now.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me? No? Oh? Yeah. So I'm a little sick, so forgive me if I have to cough here and there. Bear with me. But I just want to say thank you to the folks organizing this and also everybody here. I really appreciate the space that we have here. It's very intentional, and I really appreciate that. A little bit about myself. My name is Mayra Joana. I work for the UCLA Labor Center. I'm part of the Dream Resource Center there. And it's really interesting because I come from an organizing background space, and it was for maybe like 7 years, I was organizing not within undocumented spaces. I'm also undocumented. I was organizing against the prison industrial complex, against like educational budget cuts, and I was struggling with my own identity to some degree. And then I came into the Dream Resource Center, and I started talking about immigration and becoming much more involved. And I was granted the opportunity to be able to be introduced into research justice. Because very similarly, as the other panelists before talked about, I had this really great battle between like academia and like, organizing. And I feel like research justice for me has really been able to bridge that together for me, where I can create tools and information for my community and really give a voice to stories and lived experiences that I've lived and I know others have also shared and lived through. So for me, research justice is really, really precious to me. And my first experience with this actually was last summer. So the Dream Resource Center also has a program, an internship program. It's called Dream Summer. Last year, we did our first research project, and it was on the state of California and how undocumented individuals access healthcare throughout the state. So we really went to different communities throughout the state of California to really, we already knew how they access them. Growing up, I didn't have formal ways to access healthcare, and healthcare is something that isn't often talked about. It's a subject that is often pushed to the side. I think when we think about immigration, the most present things in our minds are often deportations and criminalization, right? It's almost secondary thought of like healthcare access, but it's so important because everybody gets sick. Sickness does not discriminate. And so we were really able to focus in and develop these questions for our community. Being the subject of research often, I've often participated in research before, so it also left, it was, to some degree, sometimes it was really traumatizing because it opened wounds for me that I didn't know how to mend or close. So I would participate in this research, but then I would feel very vulnerable in the end. And so when conducting the research, we also were very intentional about finding ways to hold healing circles or something to that degree so that we wouldn't go into individual spaces and hear their stories and then walk away and leave them vulnerable, because we know that talking about their stories, about their experiences with healthcare and their families, because healthcare is, a lot of families live in mixed status families, and so some individuals within their family would have healthcare and others wouldn't, and that within, that structure in itself is really complicated, and there are feelings that come up that maybe are swelling underneath. One of your siblings may have access to healthcare and a doctor, but when you get sick, you don't get the same kind of attention. So it's not necessarily resentment that develops, but something else. And so when taking these stories from individuals and collecting them, it was really intentional for us to be able to provide some type of resource to them, or let them know that we could really talk through with them if they wanted afterwards. Because we understand, or at least I understand what it's like to have research conducted on me and often not have the ability and control over that information and that data, or how that story is created or told. And so it was really, really important for us at the Dream Resource Center to really shape this project and be very intentional with it. So we actually brought some of, we brought the two reports that we have. Report 1, undocumented uninsured, and then the other one is Band-Aid care, and really addressing different issues that we can later talk about. And throughout the project, I think we were very, very intentional about making sure that as much community as possible were included, and we always kept in mind that this wasn't just research we were going to develop and then publish. It was definitely going to lead into something more to continue pushing for healthcare access for everyone in California and hopefully nationwide. So I think, Alma?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alma Leyva, and I'm also one of the research coordinators at the Dream Resource Center. Like Joanna was mentioning, the Dream Resource Center is a project of the UCLA Labor Center, and it really does a lot of work in trying to have trying to create resources for undocumented folks to gain access to education, anything that has to do with like immigrant rights. We do a lot of work within there. The Dream Resource Center is led by immigrant youth. Everyone that works there has been undocumented at some point or is currently still undocumented or has DACA. So it's really a space where we are folks from the community creating resources and doing things to help improve our communities. One of this research project that Joanna was talking about is something that we developed last summer. It was the first statewide research project about and by immigrant youth. So everyone involved in the process had a migrant experience of some sort. We did it through this program, Dream Summer, like Joanna was mentioning. We had a total of 37 interns throughout the state that conducted over 550 surveys of the experience that undocumented folks have in terms of healthcare and how they access it. Excuse my nerves, I get really nervous when I talk in front of people. Yeah, and so with this project, also feeling a need to have a reciprocal process, right? So having us going into the community and getting information, but also providing resources, like Joanna said, was really important. So having immigrant youth involved in every single step of the process was something that was really important. And someone from the previous panel had said something about being over-researched but underserved, and that really resonated with us, well, with me, I'm sorry. You know, having folks in academia, especially recently, coming into our communities and wanting to know about the undocumented person's experience and what we're doing and how we're accessing stuff, and then just kind of taking ownership of our stories and not giving back any resources or just kind of leaving us there with open wounds. And so it was really important, like Joanna was mentioning, to have this just process, right? So to be able to reform the way in which we do research and be able to provide like new models for research.
Oh, really quick. We're really honored to be like sitting next to her. Fabiola is also on our advisory board, so yeah. This is really exciting.
The feeling is mutual. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fabiola Santiago, and I'm going to introduce myself and also the organization that I work for. So I was actually also undocumented for about 22 years of my life until last year. I just recently got my green card. And having experiences as a woman of color with an immigrant background, the first to go to college in my family, and having an indigenous background, I understood going into academia that not everything made sense to me and not everything was applicable. So I had to battle a lot in academia, being, again, over-researched and having theories inform my life, and realize that actually it's the community that has that knowledge and the truth and the power to change the systems that continue to oppress us. So that is why I decided to get an MPH, Master's in Public Health, because I believe that health is one of those assets that it's a right, it's a basic human right that we all need to have, and it's often overlooked in a lot of social justice movements because we're always constantly working for other needs, but not necessarily health. Health is more like a position of power. Only people that are affluent talk about health and are able to access it, as you know, I'm sure you guys found out. Anyway, so after I got my master's degree, I decided to pursue this fellowship with an organization here in Oakland. It's called Human Impact Partners. We're based in Oakland, again, and we're a national organization, nonprofit, that conducts health impact assessments. That's only one of the tools that we use. We also use a health in all policies framework. And basically what that is that we put health and equity at every decision-making process. But I'm today going to be talking more about HIAs, health impact assessments, which is a 6-step tool that we use to bring in stakeholders, research, and data to influence decision makers and talk about how policies and programs impact communities, especially communities of color and marginalized communities. I think this is a great space for me to be in because we really do value our community input. A lot of the research that we do is driven by the community itself. And I'm just going to briefly talk about the 6 steps. So the first step is the screening process. And I'm also going to be drawing from various examples, but going to be focusing more on a wage theft ordinance that they're working on in LA. And we're actually collaborating with the UCLA Labor Center to do this project. So anyways, because I'm also from Los Angeles, went to UCLA, so I have a lot of my networks built in there. So when I got up here and was screening for a project, I initially contacted my networks, and the wage theft ordinance is something that they were working on. And for folks who don't know what wage theft is, it's basically the non-payment of hours worked. So whether workers don't get a paycheck, there's minimum wage violations, their tips are stolen, or they have meal and break violations, that all falls under the umbrella of wage theft. So it's a very democratic process where we ensured that both the UCLA Labor Center and the 12 organizations that include the coalition are able to participate in the project, and also that they have the capacity, the resources, and a timeline to be able to execute the entire project. So that's the first phase. The second one is a scoping phase, and that's when I personally, do the scoping, and we look at what are the social determinants of health that we're looking at here. So given that it's wage theft, we're obviously looking at employment, but what else does wage theft impact? It impacts housing and rent and food, and what is, so after that we look at what the effects of those are. So we look at how housing and rent and food impact other health outcomes, such as mental health, physical health, whether it be diabetes or depression, et cetera. And then we take this information and get the community input and ask them, is this scope what your reality is like? And then they're able to give us feedback and either add or take away, because we want to make sure that the entire process, again, is driven by the community. We do a lit review to make sure that we have the data available to show our argument, but also wherever there are gaps, that's when we do an assessment, and that can take many forms, whether they include focus groups, interviews, asset mapping, photo voice. We just have a bunch of tools to use, and we try to fill in the gaps where we don't have that information. After we get all the information, we do the data analysis, and sometimes the community is a part of it, but that depends again on resources and also on timeline. And after we get all of the assessment done and we do the analysis, we take the research back to the community. We say, this is what we came up with based on the focus group, based on the lit review. Does this reflect your reality? Yes, no, da-da-da, whatever. And then we ask them, so based on these findings, what do you recommend? What are some policies that you recommend? But most of the time, there is already a campaign or a policy in place that we're trying to influence. So in essence, we're actually crafting and molding the way that an ordinance should look like. How is it going to address the problems that communities are facing when their wages are stolen? Finally, after that, we do the recommendations and mitigations. We do a report, which is an essential part of the HIA process. But within that, we also ask community members and anyone that's in the campaign, what are other deliverables that you would like, whether that's an infographic or a fact sheet, or what can we use to actually strategically try to influence decision makers. And then the last step is monitoring and evaluation, which is very key because we want to make sure that this information is used, and we want to make sure that we did a good job at it and that it just it lives on. So that's the HIA process, and we'll probably get into more details as the panel continues.
Well, thank you all very much. As you can tell, already there's a richness in the location and positionality and different kinds of levers that each of you is involved in maneuvering in different kinds of ways towards a kind of research justice project. And the question that I want to pose to you, but I also want to pose to the audience first for a quick buzz time opportunity, is to think about our own unique positionalities, right? So take 1 or 2 minutes to introduce yourselves to one another based on, and talk just a bit about your own sort of positionality in relation either to an organization or an institution that you're affiliated with, that you're thinking about as you're in this space today, and how you utilize that positionality towards a kind of research justice or community justice-based agenda. So that's the question I'm also going to ask our panelists in just a minute. So talk amongst yourselves for 2 minutes.
That's part of the question again. So, like, how does positionality affect?
Yeah, unique positionality between yourself and the organization.
Okay. I'm very interested in your.
How does that affect your relationship to the organization?
Oh. I think I get it.
I would have mentioned that. No, it's not. It's Living Archives trying to think about transnational solidarity among, feminist saviors, with liberation movements. So, you're welcome. We'd love to have this. I also wanted to mention, I actually was undocumented. I'm going to start with that because, I didn't know we were going to have that.
I think you can.
And I think it's important to note that, and not only that, but these days I'm blurbing a book by my undocumented students. I was blurbing, this morning, early this morning, Marco and all.
Oh, yeah.
So they did a book and I'm doing a blurb for it because I probably am, I'm not sure if I'm the only formerly undocumented professor at Berkeley, but I don't know if I am or not. I only recently came out, but I am actually also, I was undocumented for 8 years, and I'm also the daughter of an undocumented mother who did not become a U.S. citizen or have any documents until I was about 14 or 15. So I'm not going to talk about my mother, but I'm going to say, the first thing I'm going to say is I just want to mention
that's the lived experience. I think we were just talking about that earlier today, how your status may change, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your experience or the traumas that you experienced that came with that, like it just doesn't disappear and go away because you get.
I still think, even though I'm highly documented now, I still think of myself in those terms.
We were just saying that.
It's
very different conversation.
I still think of myself. And mine, I was documented, and then I became undocumented when I went into exile, political exile. And there, they had a police officer on every street corner. So every single day, I just dodged the police for 8 years. So it's a big trauma that is, and I have undocumented students. I just think, because I also was a student. I was a student at that time, undocumented students. And I was terrified. I thought they were going to come in and get me. They were going to get me on the street corner. They would get me as I go into a store. Because I was in Paris where the targeted community was like Arab Muslims, and they always thought I was an Arab Muslim, which is basically and I'm part of I'm actually racial mixed. Ethiopian, part of Thailand, part of Venezuelan. But it is, one does not get it. It's not like a thing like that. There's no place for undocumentation.
No, there isn't.
It's a really good point.
Yeah, and I think that just really talks about the criminalization of like communities of color. It really just goes into that, like because it's not like documentation can change. That doesn't mean that the criminalization of your particular community that you belong to or those that you work very closely with doesn't go away, right? And that's really that experience. of it. It's just, you know, it just becomes like very narrow and focused when you identify with a particular community. At least that's been like my analysis or experience. Because, you know, police surveillance is still very prominent, like in different communities of color, and like those traumas still exist.
So I think I'm going to bring us back in just a minute. Okay. Yeah. Is that cool? Okay. Cool. Hi, I'm so sorry to do this. I invite you all to speak, and then I invite an interruption. No, they're not. No, that's good. So why don't we come back together again as a whole? Of course, the answer to the kind of question around strategy and location is not a 2-minute conversation, and I'm glad to begin to be able to stage that, and also to begin to turn that question to our panelists as well, to think about how your organization, your institution is particularly positioned, right, to influence things like resource distribution, the credentialing process, the validation process, certain kinds of access to political power, and how you've been thinking about that position strategically towards a kind of research justice aims. So I'll turn it over. Wherever you'd like to start.
Thank you. I guess before I answer that question, I just wanted to out myself as a formerly undocumented person also, who lived for 8 years of political exile in France and in Italy as an undocumented person, and also to point out that there is no such thing as post-undocumentation. It's kind of a mentality. It's kind of stays with you in various ways. And I'm delighted to be on this panel. We just had a really wonderful little conversation here in the meantime, which I hope we can pursue. I wanted also to mention that I'm also part of another group which is called Living Archives. It's based at the Center for Race and Gender, and it's trying to think about feminist and queer transnational and international solidarity among movements, groups, liberation movements, etc., things that have been erased out of many different types of historiographies. My positionality is in relation to all this is that as a queer person of color and the only academic in the two organizations that I'm primarily talking about, that is Dyketactics and LOOKS, the Lesbian of Color group, we have not had any access to political power, and we've had no access to resources, and we've had no access to any of that. But in fact, we have mainly been erased out of every historiography possible. And so some of the things that we've been thinking about are actually the impossibility of our historiographies and how do we then put them together. I've been thinking a lot about some of the challenges as that I, as an academic, and also as an activist that we encounter as we try to create some historiographies. Why would we want to create them in the first place? Well, I became kind of conscious that many of my students and other and younger activists do not really know that this history actually existed, or that other queers of color actually exist and historically and have done a lot of things because of this erasure. So it seems very important in order to avoid reinventing the wheel, and also to give young queer people of color more isolated queer people of color the possibility to think with these historiographies and to move things forward. I was elected in 2009 the archivist for Dyketactics by my other collective members, simply because I'm the only academic and nobody else wanted to do it. And they thought that it would be great if I did it, because possibly I could do it. I want to point out that Dyketactics is now kind of becoming known as a group that was in the forefront of trying to get some gay rights in Philadelphia, you know, in 1975 and all this. But that is not how we even think of ourselves, really. So it's interesting because the traces, the few traces that do exist, they don't really correspond with our you know, sort of conceptualization. We were an anti-imperialist, anti-colonial, anti-racist group. We were involved in liberation struggles in solidarity with many other liberation struggles. And I want to also point out that when we're thinking about queer archives, Jose Munoz and Judith Halberstam both have remarked that where these kinds of archives are concerned, there's no real separation between the archive and the researcher-writer. That we are the only ones who actually carry it forward because others really find it very easy to dismiss us. And I think it's important to question the multiple positionalities from which these events are experienced in the first place, survival of traces, their reconfiguration through memory, presence, absence, and various traumas. And I'm interested in how, you know, things that usually don't get written about, such as communal life, what it's like to live with the people with whom you are activists, how that gets kind of swept under the rug. It's not really a part of historiographies, and I think we need to reflect on that, and also on whether are we writing about subjects, are we writing about events? Ultimately, I'm interested in exactly what we think we're preserving or not, why we're preserving it, what's you know, what about our accountability and to whom we're accountable. And also as we write or as we inscribe, that this inscription can unfold across a lot of different genres. That could be writing, that could be personal narratives, it could be documentary film, how we think about the traces and the silence that we have, and how that's all an ongoing process. But it's most especially, I think it's important for us to consider the relations of power in which all of this happens, that is the wider relations of power in society, as well as the ones that exist within our own collectivities and between our collectivities and others, and other collectivities. So that's about it for my reflections on that for the moment. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So for positionality, I think that one of the major frameworks that I've been inspired by is the Asian settler colonial framework. And it's this idea of the history of Euro-American colonization of Hawaii, and the way that Euro-American industrialists set up the economies, the industries that ended up importing a lot of Asian laborers. So Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, and then nowadays there's a lot of Pacific Islanders. But basically what happened was that when, we start with the Asians, so like the Filipinos, they came and they were kind of like, you know, the Japanese and the Chinese, they were established within the Euro-American industrial system in the plantations. And they were, through their assimilation in that, or access to that kind of economy, and they were able to identify with American rights and benefits. So what happened was that the immigrant population ended up reifying or agreeing with the American system in Hawaii and separating them, not separating, but this kind of ideological difference from the native sovereignty discourse that didn't see, it was very difficult for them to understand the interests of the indigenous discourse because it was against their aspiration, which is to become American. So, you know, this kind of problematic is what really is at the crux of the work that I do with Hawaii Peace and Justice, which is to really raise consciousness, particularly in the Filipino community, about our history of occupation that was necessary in order to colonize Hawaii, because the taking of Pearl Harbor, for example, was necessary in order for the United States to repress Filipino resistance during the Filipino-American War. And a lot of people don't know that, and it's because of our education system, and that's another issue that I'm going to come to later. But So let me go back to what I'm doing, which is I'm a program consultant for Hawaii Peace and Justice. I work as a community mentor at Farrington High School. And so this is a youth leadership program and this school is largely immigrant Pacific Islander Filipino youth and Hawaiian youth. And so our methodology is basically posing questions on what matters to them regarding issues of peace and justice. And when I first met them, it was the issue of bullying. And then I would always try to, we would talk about bullying, how it shows up, and then how it ends up, we try to make it connected to structural violence. So we then kind of bring in how militarism and military recruitment is a kind of nation-state bullying over low-income immigrant working-class youth to join the military if they don't have access for higher ed. So we try to kind of, move the sort of discourse and their analysis, and then our current campaign is actually corporate takeover of schools. I'm sure many of you guys are dealing with the race to the top, No Child Left Behind, the standardized exams. So this stuff is also happening in Hawaii, and we're trying to struggle against that. And we see that the No Child Left Behind, there's a part in it that says that in order for states to receive federal funds like Race to the Top, they must give student personal information to military recruiters. So at this moment right now, if you have children that are in public schools, information is going to the recruiters right now. And if their personal information, so they can call them up to ask them if they want to join and do their spiel, right? But anyway, so this is the issue that we're trying to organize youth to look at, and we're looking at it as a privacy rights issue. And so the purpose of our group is, again, trying to raise the consciousness of the young people about thinking critically about what joining the military means. And again, the military is touted in the media as, you get access to college, you get to travel the world, and there's all these different things, and they have a lot of media and a lot of, kind of their message gets out there, and our message is very small, and so we have to try to create new messages to connect to them about why resistance and why trying to create a different future and what it means to ally their own personal trajectories with values of sovereignty. And how it's not just, it is related to Hawaiian sovereignty and how to ally immigrant youth to align with indigenous sovereignty, because these immigrant youth's own indigeneity was also experienced colonization and is currently suffering from lack of sovereignty with their current militarization. Because right now, in the Pacific, we're undergoing the Pacific Pivot, which is part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So what's happening is that a lot of these pharmaceutical companies, a lot of technology, resource extractive companies are kind of based in these different nation states, and they're vying for control over water right, like access around the shipping lanes. And so, for example, China and the Philippines and the United States, the Pacific Pivot is the US now looking at the Pacific because they want to make sure that they're the big dog in this arena to control these shipping lanes. And China's rising, because now North Korea, has all these kind of they're playing these war theater games now. And so in this process, Hawaii's in the middle and it's experiencing buildup. There's bases expanding in Pohakuloa, which is in the Big Island. On Oahu, there's a bunch of military bases there too. The Philippines, they had technically, kicked out the bases in the 1990s, but now because of the Visiting Forces Agreement, the U.S. and the Philippines are working together to host military naval ships. And then, of course, Japan and Okinawa is also still being occupied, as well as South Korea and Jeju Island, and different kind of movements that were resisting naval base buildup. So in this whole systemic kind of map that I'm giving, it's no wonder why recruitment is such a big thing in Hawaii, right? Because they need these constant flow of young people to fill the boots, to kind of be the people to ride and to work in these ships and these airplanes and, in these potential wars. And so it's really important for us for me to have looked at the Asian settler colonial framework, because it is one that makes immigrants look critically about what system are they working for, and how do you then align with a kind of a decolonial framework, looking at indigenous history and their relations of also being desocialized out of their own indigenous history, or for immigrant folks when they become diaspora, right? And so I think that's something that I'm interested in.
Thanks. You want to go first? You go first.
Okay. So in terms of positionality, we were talking a lot about how, as a Dream Resource Center, we have the UCLA name that comes with, being part of the UCLA Labor Center, but also, like, on a personal level, like within the report, being that we were all undocumented or we all had a migrant experience, we were in a really unique position within our community to be able to conduct this research project, right? And one of the things that I was thinking about was, when you're in an institution and you have like all these resources, it's what you're doing with the resources that really speaks to who you are and your actions that you take. So having the resources to be able to provide these opportunities for undocumented folks or for immigrant youth to experience research, because the folks that were part of our research project came from all sorts of different backgrounds. Some had just graduated high school, some had their master's, some were working on their bachelor's. I mean, I myself am still an undergraduate. So we all came from different levels of education, but being able to be provided with an opportunity to develop ourselves as researchers and gather these stories that as a community we already are very well aware of. Like the stuff that we found in the report that we have data for example, that 69% of immigrant youth or folks that have deferred action don't have health insurance. Those are things that we already know, right? That folks are waiting a really long time to go to the doctor because they're afraid of cost and because they don't have insurance. These are experiences that as a community we're already very aware of, but we are in a position now where we can put this all together in a report and be seen as like something that's legitimate, whereas before it'd be more of like, oh, these are like isolated instances, and now we can say like, no, there's a group of folks and we're here and this is what we're experiencing and this is why policy changes need to happen. Yeah, and then the limiting thing, I think, is that as like a UCLA institution, we can't necessarily like back certain like policies or like, but as like immigrant youth involved in this project, we're able to create resources and support work that's going on the ground that we can talk about more later because we have a campaign going on, a Health for All campaign. Yeah, and I think, Fiona, if you want to add.
Yeah, I just want to add, when thinking about positionality, I think something that really resonated with me was the word validation. And I think as, I guess, maybe a hot topic of research currently, like to be undocumented and researching the undocumented experience, I feel like there's a lot of research happening around that topic currently. But there's also an infantilization that happens with you know, I think with myself even, when I encounter and talk to academics or people in, you know, working on their masters and PhDs, you know, and are conducting this type of research, and they're taking our stories, but at the same time, this sort of validation that also is accompanied by an infantilization, and that's really problematic because, you know, we're not children, we're not infants, we're not individuals who can't critically think. We very much are critical thinkers. And so working with UCLA, being able to even put the UCLA label on our report really pushes at that narrative of like, like, no, you can infantilize me. Yes, we can conduct our own research. Yes, we have the ability to, do exactly what you do. And in fact, we can probably do it better because we have that experience. Because we have, the last panel said that we have something to teach. Yeah, we do. Y'all are coming to our community and looking to us for information. When we are the holders of that knowledge and information. And so it's really about challenging even that idea of y'all are a community that maybe can't produce this for yourself. In fact, there's undocumented scholars who are currently doing that for themselves, working on their master's, PhDs, so I've been thinking about that and really being able to utilize UCLA, the institution, as a tool of empowerment for myself and the community that I represent, and really trying to even create a bridge between the individuals that aren't necessarily my coworkers, but definitely trying to provide as much resources to them through myself. Right? There's also the people and the connections that I've been able to develop just being placed and working for the UCLA Labor Center and being able to learn this new method of research and understanding that it's not just research that is specifically for in a particular institution. It's research that I can then go back to the different organizations and community orgs that also have these very pressing questions and who are lacking tools to do it. There's just thinking about particular things of access, like software, having a stable funding or some funding, or the ability to make those connections with individuals. Even the ability to have a space, I think that's really important too. And giving that access to the different partners that we work with, community, grassroots organizations that we're currently working with. And, because I know the experience as an organizer and how difficult it is to gather, create an event and even just collect people in a room. When looking for those spaces, it becomes very difficult if you don't have direct access to someone who can provide you a space. So being in my position, I can reserve a space and without charging anyone. So again, it's creating a bridge between myself, the position I have, and my community and the different organizations that I've been working with. Or grassroots communities. So there's again this compare contrast to where I am now versus I used to be very active in organization, the Immigrant Youth Coalition, Los Angeles, and always understanding that there was an infantilization of my story, almost fetishizing of it, and also an invalidation that was constant. And now being where I'm at, it's less. But that infantilization from academics is still there, and that's something that I'm struggling with because now I'm no, you know what? I'm also an academic. You need to acknowledge and respect me. Yes, and you need to respect the work that we do because it's equal. I may not be using the same methods you are. I'm using a different lens, but it's still research, and but it's just research, right? Because it's definitely being used as a tool to empower, and not just because I'm going to produce something. So,
yeah.
Just
to add something really quick, Joanna reminded me of in terms of validation, reminded me of an experience that we had. Our other team member and I went to DC to do a presentation on the work before we had the reports, and we did a poster presentation, and it was called AMP, and I don't remember what it stands for, but it was. Huh?
Allied Media Project?
No, not the Allied Media Project. It was another one. But we were there, and we did a poster presentation, and there was somebody that went up to us, and they were looking at our poster, and he goes, oh, what is this research justice? You should consider reframing that because you're going to push a lot of people away and they're not going to want to know they're not going to want to read whatever you're saying. And just going on and on about how the methods that we use aren't very valid and how they're very biased. And then he turned to me and he asked, oh, are you working on your graduate stuff? And he goes, and I told him, no, I'm still an undergraduate at Cal State LA. And then he was like, oh, okay, well, you still have a lot to learn, and it's okay, you're gonna get it. And I was like, what? And I already have, like, I'm already battling a lot of these, like, internalized, like, thoughts of myself, too, right, of trying to produce, like, really good things and really taking ownership of this, of like, my knowledge and the work that I bring to the table. And so just having to constantly hear folks, like say stuff like that, and seeing the work that we're doing here specifically with undocumented and uninsured, and seeing it as like invalid because we're folks from the community that have this bias is something that I feel like we're gonna have to continuously struggle with. But again, like Joanna's saying, like really having folks see that the work that we're doing is extremely valid and that we have, that we're bringing all this knowledge to the table, and folks just have to recognize it as expertise that it is. Mm-hmm.
I see we already have cards, so I'm going to try to be brief so that we get to the audience's questions. I think that the issue or the concept of positionality is kind of loaded because it's, personally, there are different levels of that on an individual level within the organization that I work, and then also inter-organizationally. So as an individual, just to give you all a little bit of information, the Health and Equity Fellowship was actually just started last year, and that came because they realized that there is not enough diversity in the organization that I work for, but they realized that a lot of the organizations that they work with and they try to help or to build partnerships with are mostly low-income communities of color. So in terms of positionality, they realized, okay, we need to kind of expand the organization and add a little bit of diversity to it because there is a lot of privilege where they stand. So it's more upstream than downstream where the organization is at, Human Impact Partners. But we're not the decision makers, and we're also not part of the community, or at least that's what we say when we work with communities. We're not part of the community. So we know that you hold the knowledge. We want to make sure that we can use what you're doing and use your campaign to add an extra strategy to frame things differently so that you can influence decision makers. So we really try to mobilize people. It's more, I guess we're still trying to recognize whether our work is community-led or community-centered, because there's a little bit of difference in that, but I think that there is a little bit of both in it. When working with academics, we're also in a lower, lower level of positionality, simply because, so for example, the wage theft HIA that I'm working on, the UCLA Labor Center wanted to make sure that we did an IRB, which is something we do not do just because of its lengthy process. And we were always on a really short timeline, and we want to make sure that by the time the decisions are made, we have the data and the information to influence decision makers. But that was one of the compromises that we had to do, is actually do an IRB so that we have that UCLA approval and that stamp at the end of the report, and so that it can be used, and so that they also can give input and review and edit and all that stuff. So it shifts. It's constantly shifting. Sometimes we have the, I guess, more power, but we're always aware of that. And that is what we're trying to do with all of the HIAs, is to make sure that folks understand that we need to shift this power, that there is an imbalance of power at all times, and being cognizant of where we are in that, I guess, in that spectrum is very important. I think that again, that's why they brought me on board. It's because they realized we need somebody that comes from these communities so that they can give their expertise. And so I highly value that they value that. I think that it's very important to make sure that we have people that represent these communities and all levels of change, whether that's on a, just like service level organizations, the ones that provide service providers, as well as political advocacy organizations and also to decision makers, that they're the ones, that they represent the community. I was going to say something in regards to being undocumented, the fact that we're able to sit here now and speak to you all, and at one point we were all undocumented, I think it says a lot about positionality and all the professors, the staff members, and the courageous undocumented folks that came before us to use their power, their knowledge, their lived experiences, and their truth to speak up for us, and also allow a space so that you all can listen to us and we can exchange information, we can exchange knowledge, and continue working on community engagement and participation and collaborating. I mean, I didn't know that they were going to present, so I think that's great. The fact that there's the UCLA Labor Center is being represented here, but I don't work for them. I think that's great, and I think that that's part of research justice, is to create more opportunities for other researchers and other organizations and campaigns and social justice in general.
Thank you. So we have just a bit of time, just a couple minutes. I already have two wonderful questions that I'll pose, and I just wanted to remind you, if there are other questions that you are burning to ask at this particular point, please go ahead and utilize those note cards at your table. Someone will come around and collect them, and we'll try and get one or two other questions into the mix as well. So I'll just actually ask both of these questions at once, because I think they both have to do with a kind of binarization or polarization. And so the first question is about how grappling with undocumented people and doing research around undocumented people, you navigate the kind of dominant binary between the good immigrant and the bad immigrant, right? That is so kind of pervasive in kind of dominant U.S. frameworks, right? So how do you navigate that good immigrant, bad immigrant framework? And I think this actually has some interesting resonance too in the Pacific Island context, right? And then another kind of binary that I think is interesting to have you reflect a little bit on is around the question of ownership, right? When you're located in an institution, how do you navigate the relationship of the ownership of knowledge, right? Who owns that knowledge? Is it the community organization? Is it the community? Is it the institution that gives it the validation in the kind of stamp of approval? How do you navigate the sort of the questions of the ownership of knowledge? Yeah.
Tackle both questions really fast. So to go with the second one, the ownership, that's actually something that was very part of the wage theft HIA that I'm still working on. Again, because we were partnered with UCLA Labor Center, they wanted to do the IRB process. In doing the application, I was just very hesitant. I was like, I'm not sure if I like this. What are they going to do with the data? Is it really going to serve a purpose that we want it to serve? There are 12 other organizations that are part of the coalition that are not part of the institution that need to use this data. I don't want it to just sit there. So what I did is I contacted my research director in my organization, and I told her, I just don't like the way this sounds. Can I do something about it? And she said, yes, we can write a authorship agreement. So while there is an IRB process and there's an IRB application, once the report is produced, we can have an agreement or like an MOU with the coalition and with the UCLA Labor Center to ensure that this report and the data gets used by other organizations and in other campaigns, because honestly, wage theft is something that affects different industries. A lot of low-wage workers working in different industries, so it wasn't just for one particular body. So that's kind of one way that we navigated that. As far as the good and the bad immigrant, that's very relevant as well. A lot of the participants for our focus groups were of some immigrant descent, many of them undocumented. And one of the issues that came up a lot and that they brought up, again, we didn't do it, we didn't bring up the issue, was alcohol use. And that is a stereotype that we see among immigrant communities, that they're lazy, that they don't work, they're alcoholics, or et cetera. But when we really delve into that issue and that topic, we realized, and they used theory, they really used a lot of their consciousness and a lot of critical thinking to elaborate on these issues. One of the places where alcohol use is very common is in restaurant industries. And I have worked in restaurant industry for about 10 years, knew this very well, but I wanted to hear it from them. So they said, sometimes they don't give us money, they don't give us cash, they don't pay for our wages, so they give us alcohol. And I knew that happened. The other thing about alcohol that they mention is that, well, of course workers are going to drink alcohol. They're overworked. They don't, what did they say? So they're overworked, they're exhausted, they're just a number, they're replaceable, they're treated less like inhumanely, with no dignity, they don't care about themselves, they're stressed about having to pay for rent, for food, for transportation. Alcohol is an easy coping mechanism. I mean, we can talk about alcohol in the law industry, like among lawyers. Like that's one of the issues too, like the way that we use certain topics to, again, criminalize certain communities, but it happens across a lot of different industries, both low income and high income folks. So again, the way that they did specifically say that they don't want to include that in the report. But I think that it's important to understand that oppression feeds oppression and violence feeds violence. And when you're just a number and highly oppressed, sometimes the only coping mechanism is alcohol and drug use. And so framing it in a certain way so that we don't criminalize the bad, we don't polarize the immigrant communities is very important. But it has to be strategically done, because it is true that if this report gets into the anti-immigrant organization or people, like they can use this against us. But at the same time, it's very important to shed lights on these issues and make sure that they're addressed, because it's definitely a problem, again, among restaurant workers and day laborers. But it's hard to escape when it's being given as an incentive for work. So that's what I have to say about that.
I'd like to address the question of ownership and location in the institution, who owns the knowledge, which I think is, both questions are really excellent, but this one I feel like I can probably answer. I want to mention that with the Dyketactics work and with the Lokes work, I've been doing this outside of the academy for a very long time. And now that it's coming a little bit into the academy, I'm concerned about how to find ways for authors to keep their rights. In the case of Dyketactics, this question is a little bit attenuated by the fact that several Dyketactics members have actually published a lot of their own work. So for example, Julie Blackwoman, who is a well-known poet, Monica Hand, a Harlem poet who's also quite published, Barbara Ruth, who's a local area Native American and Jewish mixed race poet, and also active in the queer disability movement, has also published a lot of poetry and is continually publishing it. I want to mention that about Dyketactics, I wrote an article which was published some years ago in a collection by Tommy Avicoli Mecca called Smash the Church, Smash the State, The Early Years of Gay Liberation. But before publishing it, I had it read by all members of Dyketactics that I could find and commented on, and I said, if there's stuff in here that you feel, will mess you up, please let me know and I will take it out. And I did take out a few things. And I also added a few things because folks reminded me, hey, this is important, how come you haven't addressed it? So I still see, as part of a collective, the process of even representing the collective as a collective process. It's still a collective process, and that to me has worked. It works in the case of Dyketactics. In the case of Lokes, where we are co-editing, 3 of us, an anthology, we are keeping the copyright with each of the authors or artists who contribute to it. They will have their own copyright. I just want to mention that I was very happy about this question because I think it's incredibly important, because otherwise there's a kind of thievery that happens that I think is really, problematic ethically, and we do need to keep this question in the forefront as we do this work.
So I guess I'll speak to I'll try to do both, but the most one I want to answer is the undocumented people and the good and bad immigrant in the U.S. framework. And I think that if we think about the U.S. as perpetually a war machine, it doesn't necessarily, I mean, it'll say the good immigrant are those who just kind of follows and assimilates into that trajectory, and the bad immigrant are those who don't follow the rules and therefore they get criminalized. They get all these disciplinary mechanisms upon them so that they become good citizens and discipline into the trajectory of the militaristic state. And so I think that what we need to think about then is, if we think about indigenous frameworks, is the question of the civil rights, right? Civil rights has been about representation by the state, like trying to work within the laws, work within the apparatuses that makes up the nation state. But the sovereignty framework is asking the legitimacy of the whole structure of the nation itself. We need to question that. We can't just seek representation in it. We need to actively transform it and critique it and even try to propose alternatives, right? Alternative systems of governance. And so when, in Hawaii, there's the emergence and the strength of the sovereignty movement, the Hawaiian sovereignty movement, and there's many versions of it, different discourses. But I think that what is important of this concept of sovereignty is the concept of our ability to govern ourselves, that we don't have to wait for somebody from the Congress to tell us what to do or what is order, but that we should be able to have the capacity to govern ourselves. And that requires decolonization. Decolonization of our own cultures, because of the ways that through colonization, we've been taught that we have to listen to master, right? And so how do we stop thinking like that? And then how do we, not just for our own cultural community, but interculturally, right? It's hard to even think about how do you relate to your decolonization and got to change your relation to another group that you've kind of stereotyped within the white supremacist system. So it's like there's this sort of personal and collective transformation as the practice of sovereignty. That is what I think, what I'm learning from the sovereignty movement in Hawaii. And then the second question is about ownership of knowledge, and I think that the community institution, the community organization is what owns this knowledge. But the question is there sustainability of community organization? There's the problem of the nonprofit industrial complex, right? This way that even within small startup nonprofits, that we have to kind of follow the funders and master kind of way, And so I think that there's that problematic that we get stuck in, but also the way in which community is generating new leadership always, perpetually, to be the ones to fulfill, because a nonprofit is just a vehicle. If you don't have the young people coming up there to be the next generation, the nonprofit's gonna die, or that small autonomous space can vanish. So it's important for it's not just building these structures, but building the people.
Okay. So I want to address the good, bad immigrant question. First, I just want to say that personally, I don't think that exists, like to be able to categorize individuals into two different camps, like you're either good or you're either bad. That doesn't exist. People are complicated, right? And I know we all know that. Second, I want to also sort of touch, or actually not touch, but really discuss like prison industrial complex and detention centers, and how citizen, prison industrial, like prison system. Undocumented don't have that. Detention centers. It's really the same. It's the same thing. It's one or the other. And this sort of like narrative between the dreamer, which would be the good immigrant, right? And normally you already have, like, you think of dreamer and you already have an idea of what that person looks like. So youth, high school, or community college, you have a narrative that's been told to you, 4.0 student, does very, very well. And then you have like individual who doesn't go to college, or, whatever. But those things are just narratives that were created, I think, and it's sort of been stuck to us. And I think currently, just as a whole, we're trying to like really get away from that narrative, because maybe in its inception it was okay because we were trying to appeal to a larger audience, because we wanted to be acknowledged for our existence. Like, hey, we're here, we exist, pay attention to us, like we're valid human beings. But then I feel like it's sort of been used in this weird way in which only immigrants who fall within that first category of like college bound, even there's like, I think almost an age as well that you think of, maybe limit is like 30, and then, because even DACA, like Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, right, the age gap is 30, and so people transition out of those ages, and like, there are individuals who, for one reason or another, couldn't, you know, they weren't here or something happened and they don't qualify for deferred action, right? And so there's still this like very complicated narrative of that we're trying to get away from. And just as a quick, Dream Summer is really trying to, I think, push that narrative as well as other organizations, grassroots organizations, like who are really trying to stay away from that, because we understand that our parents are criminalized. We as individuals, maybe as youth or individuals who are going to college, are not being criminalized, but there's still a larger, like we're a very, very small percentage of the undocumented population that go to college. You know, there's a much larger population and percentage of individuals who don't go that route, and actually our parents have children, are still undocumented, don't qualify for deferred action, and then they're criminalized. Again, and it all has to do with, I think, racial profiling, prison industry, detention centers. It's all a money-making machine, really, and I think it's important to start acknowledging the intersections between, I'm like losing my train of thought here. I'll get back to it. I'm gonna let you go. Go ahead.
You know, we're a little bit over already, and I want to make sure to ask one other question of all the panelists. That was a really creative, kind of interesting question. So I hope that's okay. Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. So thank you, and thank you for bearing with us as we go over just a hair. Someone asked a really wonderful question about sustainability. Now, sustainability is a great word. One of the sort of entry points into the question of sustainability that this question asks is around joy and fun, right? How do we build joy and fun into the research justice work that we do? So if you could reflect for maybe a minute on a moment in your work that really highlights and captures for us the ways in which joy and fun really enter into the dynamics.
Okay, I guess I'll touch a little bit upon that. I guess in all honesty, at first I want to acknowledge that we had, even though we tried our best to follow self-care and to really do this research project in a very healthy way, we also acknowledged, like as a team, that we were doing health work in a very unhealthy way throughout the summer. We were, and that's just being honest, we were traveling up and down the state. I think all summer I was home maybe a week. I never got to see my family. We didn't get any rest. We were stressed with interns and collecting all these surveys. And but really reflecting on that afterwards, and even now as we're disseminating the report, and really trying to be very intentional about self-care and sustainability. How are we supposed to promote self-care and promote this like health and wellness if we ourselves aren't doing the work in that sort of sense? So we try within our work to do like self-care days. We go. Well, one time we went to get massages together, and we were like, we're going to do this every week. It didn't happen, but we're thinking about it. We're constantly having conversations about sustainability and conversations with each other about self-care, having talking circles with each other regularly, even if we can't physically go do things like get massages or just like hang out, doing, just healing with conversation and having these conversations also with our future interns. This summer, for our Dream Summer curriculum, we really want to instill self-care and really have a conversation about how, as a movement, we're really burning ourselves out, constantly trying to do work and not really taking the time to step back and take care of ourselves and take care of our health. At the Dream Resource Center, we have a project called the Circle Project, which works with having healing justice spaces, because undocumented folks don't usually have access to don't have access to mental health resources, having to create our own, and when we do have access, you have to sort of just teach the people about your experience and what it's like, and instead of healing, it sort of becomes like this learning thing that can get tiring. So having to create models of our own and really trying to promote our work and do it in a healing way, which takes a lot, and it takes a lot of conscious effort to do, but conversations start. We can start it through conversation.
I think that this question of sustainability and healing is super important. I think that about joy and fun in research, it's not all joy and fun, I totally agree. A lot of it is trauma, stress, fatigue, overwork and all this kind of stuff. But I also want to point out that there are different ways of doing this. Like, for example, in an earlier phase when I lived together in a collective house with people from Dyketactics, that was very energizing. And we did do sometimes some self-care around music. We made sure that we ate decent food. We had some downtime together, and we even built into our politics some downtime. Like, for example, instead of going and attacking something, we would go and do theater in front of some place, and it was fun doing the theater. It was fun to plan for it, make the costumes for it. I mean, to me that was downtime, but it was political downtime. We also, I think that it's important to think about collective life together, but moreover, I think it's important to think about a collective spirit together, because even though we don't live together anymore, we are together on Facebook, and if somebody needs our support, we're all there for that person. It's about caring for each other and not just seeing each other as like these little sort of robots going around doing all this political work. And I also want to point out that I've been learning a lot from my students about healing justice. In fact, some students in ethnic studies created a special issue of a journal in ethnic studies called Healing Justice, and I want to do a little shout out to Tala Kanmalek, who actually was the editor of that. So I think that we always are learning about this. And I'm really grateful to those who've helped me learn about it.
Okay, so joy and fun in work. I'm so work-oriented. I was thinking sustainability of the work that we do when it comes to fun, like when they reference us in another article, or when they use our work in like mainstream Spanish media. That's fun. Or when we find an article that we've been looking for, like, wow, somebody actually did research on that. That's great. And then we all start clapping and laughing and have a joyous moment. But I guess this refers more to self-sustainability. The organization that I work for is fantastic at that, actually. So they really talk the talk and walk the walk. On Wednesdays, we work from home, which is amazing. And it being a nonprofit is actually pretty great, because I think it's mostly like the tech startups that do all that work from home. We have a couch at our office, so when we get tired of sitting at the desk, we have a couch. We can work whenever, wherever, as long as we meet deadlines, as long as we make it into to all of our meetings. I think that our health is, you know, we do all health-related work, so they do want to make sure that we're healthy physically, mentally, emotionally. So that is very key, and that's very important that they allow us to do that. Let's see, what other fun things do we do? Or personally, since I just moved from LA about, 9 months ago when I started this fellowship, I just do a lot of, I do a little bit of Muay Thai, and it's something I've never done before, and that takes up a lot of mind and body as well, and I don't think about anything, so it's great because it's a new learning experience, and it just, all this, the stuff that we read, all the research that we do is kind of put aside, so that's a great way for me personally to have a little bit of joy and fun and not talk about just the horrific social issues that exist. Yeah.
I also agree with what everyone said. Creativity, building in time for yoga session or exercise for yourself, doing stuff that is more about, you know, being with your friends in your, you know, comrades or your friends, and it's family kind of feeling, I think, is what makes it sustainable.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and please join me in thanking our wonderful panel.